Morning Matters on KC24, your local election headquarters.
We pay the highest taxes in America, the highest income tax, highest state sales tax, now the highest gas tax and highest car tax. So I think taxpayers are getting frustrated, and I think when they see legislators increasing their own salary, this is adding insult to injury.
The taxpayer advocates not too happy with the 3% pay raise going to the governor and legislators next year. With the increase, the governor's salary will top $200,000 for the first time in state history. California's governor and lawmakers, they're already the highest paid in the nation. Back with our panel right now, Republican Diane Pierce. We got Democrat David Rowell with us. Thanks for being here, guys. Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
The legislators, they make six figures as well. It's, you know, they are well paid. Of course, depending on where you live in California, that can mean one thing and then mean something else in some other places. Diane, does this bug you, the raise, or do you think this is just what happens?
Well, I do think that, you know, one thing I noticed is that it isn't them voting their own raise. There's an independent commission that does oversee
that is appointed by the governor.
But at the same time, I think it just goes to show it's really hard to afford to live in this state, and I recommend the lawmakers take a look at John Cox for governor, who wants to make California affordable again.
David, what do you think about this?
Like Diane, I think it's problematic, but more cosmetically than anything else. You know, it's a 3% raise. It's less than the 4% they gave other state workers last year. It was proposed by an independent body, not by the legislatures themselves. And frankly, the graphic that I saw before coming here today showed the governor making like $140,000. I heard you say $200,000. I saw it goes from 132 to 139, something like that.
Interesting.
For the governor. That's less than the executive for LA County makes. That's less than the mayor of Los Angeles makes. I mean, it's
that's less than a lot of that would be less than a lot of educators in Fresno Unified.
Superior Court judges make 130, 140.
I am not infallible. I could have some wrong information there.
It did go up to 201.
It did go to 201.
The last one at 3% took it up to 195, and now it's 201.
Okay,
but I'm not sure what you saw, but
yeah,
for governor specifically.
Okay, well, good. Man. Let's talk about the Supreme Court, because lots happening with that. Obviously, Anthony Kennedy is retiring this summer. This has made conservatives, I'm sure, extremely happy. Some high fives going around, and it probably makes Democrats pretty upset, David, that this is happening, because as we saw this week, these Supreme Court cases, they often have huge impacts on California.
You know, there's so much you could say about the Supreme Court. It's really hard to know where to start. The decision that you talked about with respect to union dues, I think that's going to have a tremendously negative impact on America. Unions have been the lifeblood of the middle class for 60 years in America. You know, the unions, more than any other institution, are responsible for the growth of the middle class into a group that can afford to buy cars and refrigerators and houses and take vacations and makes the whole economy go around. And without unions, that wouldn't have happened. And this undercuts unions tremendously. The result of this opinion is that, you know, if you and I are both in the bargaining unit and we work for whoever, I'm a union member, you're not. Now you don't have to pay your share of the union negotiating better wages, better working conditions, things for you. Yeah. You just get to free ride. So unions are going to go out of business. This effectively busts unions. This whole effort was funded by the Koch brothers and other billionaires who really don't like unions because they like to keep their money, not pay it to workers. So this is terribly anti-worker.
And that is a specific case that we saw. Of course, Anthony Kennedy, I believe, voted in the side that won. I think he was one of the five. I mean, Anthony Kennedy, Sacramento guy, by the way. There's a statue of Anthony Kennedy in Sacramento. He was the swing vote. He was appointed by a Republican president.
Correct.
The next justice is probably going to be much more conservative.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, I think that we could probably bet on that, right, Diane?
Yes.
Focusing on California, what could this do? As we talk about these cases, do you see this maybe impacting the way things possibly are done in the future in California?
I mean, I hope so. We have an attorney general who is like just filing every lawsuit he can find against the Trump administration. He already lost one this week.
And rightfully so.
But
filing, I mean, not losing.
Yeah. He has won more than he's lost.
But at the same time, I think it hopefully it will give us a little better footing as far as making sure that these frivolous lawsuits from people who just don't like the result of elections that they lost from just suing that administration because they're unhappy with the winning agenda.
And again, I just have to object to such a horrible characterization. When you sue an administration because they promulgate laws based on religious bigotry, that's not because you lost the election. That's because it's antithetical to everything that we stand for in America. And with respect to Kennedy and the vacancy that is coming up, I have to say this is a scary, scary time for America. The Republican caucus did a thing that's never been done in the history of America before. They simply refused to consider a nomination.
Garland. You're talking about the Merrick Garland case.
I am. They just said, we're not even going to do it. And the reason that McConnell did that is because he knew he probably would have been approved. You know, he's a middle-of-the-road guy.
But do
and
you
so they held that open.
Yeah. Do you
That's
think that
never
should happen
happened
again? Do you
before.
think that should happen again now?
I think it will happen every time now. I think that's the new normal.
But do you think it should be held this time because it was held before the presidential election? Do you think it should be, any decision should be held until after the midterm?
I think the chances of the Republican caucus holding this nomination, because that's the rule that they articulated so loud and so long before, are nil. That will never happen.
Because that's been the narrative. That's been the argument here so far.
Yeah, but you're asking for them to not be hypocrites, and they are. We can't have an election because, you know, it wouldn't be fair.
Is it hypocritical,
now, we can have an election.
Well,
there's so many glaring differences between this. First of all, it's called the Biden rule because back in '92, when there wasn't even a vacancy on the Supreme Court and Bush Sr. was running for re-election, he said, hey, just so everybody's on the same page, let's make sure if any vacancy comes up, we wait until after the presidential election. And now, as we saw in 2016, they said, hey, if it was good enough for Biden then, I think we ought to let the people decide who's going to make the next nomination. The obvious difference here is this is a midterm election. This is not changing who makes the nomination. This is similar to 2010 when Elena Kagan was confirmed in August of 2010, mere months before a midterm election, and she was replacing a Republican-nominated Supreme Court justice. So it's entirely different, and it just makes no sense that
it's different.
Chuck Schumer knows it's different.
That it's completely the same.
Chuck Schumer knows it's totally different. He just has to go out there and do his best. So.
All right, I got 1 minute left. So let me ask you about the gas tax repeal. It made the ballot here this week. You guys each get 20 seconds. Tell me how you think that's going to go and how you think that's going to affect the ballots here in November in general, the election.
I think it will energize people to get out in November. I think hopefully it will be a boost to John Cox. He's obviously campaigning very hard on that issue and for that issue. That was kind of his baby. Another important thing to make note of with it, a lot of people were saying, well, what's the point of repealing it? They'll just do it again. But the way this initiative is written makes sure that anything like that would have to go before the voters again. So
it's on the ballot. I hope the voters approve it. We desperately need the money to fix our roads and bridges.
Repeal, you don't want them to vote for the repeal.
Exactly.
Keep it there.
Yeah, exactly. I also think it's a huge mistake for the electorate to start messing with the Constitution. You should never approve any measure that changes the state constitution. That shouldn't happen in the ballot box.
We're going to leave it right there. You guys are great. Thanks so much for coming on here and debating for us. I appreciate it. Coming up, we got local reaction to that Supreme Court ruling upholding the Trump travel ban. Haven't talked about that one. Boy, a lot happened this week. That's next.